Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartman. Now, I recently led a webinar about some of the key concepts in my book, The Air Raid Sales Offense, and we are now officially underway with our second print run, which is very exciting, and I'm humbled and excited to get more of them out into the world. And as I was talking to Rick Schumacher, who's the founder and CEO of LBM Journal, about how to make this the most interactive and engaging and useful, my thought was, well, let's bring in some friends to talk candidly about what they're doing leading their businesses and where some of these ideas in the Air Raid Sales Offense are similar or they are using exactly the ones as described from the book so you can understand how they might make an impact in your life day to day managing your business. Now, in the recording, you will hear me introduce the three people who joined me on the panel. That is Bob Aiken of Curtis Lumber in New York. It is Miss Tina Breen of Manufacturers Reserve Supply in New Jersey, and Mr. Colby Chandler of Cassidy Jones in Texas. But the people that made this all happen were my friends at LBM Journal. And if you're not familiar, LBM Journal is the leading media company serving lumberyards, building material distributors, wholesalers, manufacturers, and service providers. Their mission is simple: to deliver a mix of strategic, street-level business intelligence with a big picture perspective of where our industry is and where it's going. I read their magazine cover to cover every single month, and their LBM Strategies Conference is one that I never miss, and I'm proud to be part of it this year. It's October 15th through the 17th, 2025 in Nashville, so fantastic location. And we are going to tour Walker Lumber, which is one of the most unique lumberyards I have ever been to. Talked to Mr. Ray Hales a year or two ago. Where did I meet him and talk to him? That's right, at the LBM Strategies Conference that year. So this is a place that you should absolutely be. If you are not registered yet, you should absolutely do that today. Be there. You are going to learn more from the speakers that are there, and probably more importantly, the other smart people who are just coming there to learn from each other than you are going to learn at any other conference this year. All right, that's it. Let's dive into it. Please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Bob Aiken of Curtis Lumber, Miss Tina Breen of MRS, and Mr. Colby Chandler of Cassidy Jones. As always, thank you for listening. Well, I'm excited to have this conversation with all three of you here. So a quick little overview, because in sales, we all have to answer the inevitable question, who are you? And why should I care? So Colby Chandler, Cassidy Jones in Texas, 6 locations, grandfather and father were both home builders. He descended over to the dark side here. He's been with Cassidy Jones for 15 years, started in the yard, ran operations, became an outside sales rep, and then a GM. And then recently, last couple of years, transitioned to sales manager. He was also a collegiate athlete in Texas. Football, you might say? Nope. Not tough enough for football. Baseball.
Failed collegiate athlete. That's what we have in common.
We do. And we'll circle back to this. He's also an ailing Cowboys fan, yet someone who loves the Brian Schottenheimer hire. You're the one. So, Colby, appreciate you making time to be here. Tina Breen with Manufacturers Reserve Supply in New Jersey. She's been in marketing, operations, sales leadership. Been with MRS for 18 years. She's the vice president of sales and marketing. She has a master's in psychology from Purdue. She's wicked smart. And Colts fan from 5 years living in Indiana. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay, not sure how I feel about that, but okay. And then we got Bob Aiken, Curtis Lumber, 23 locations, New York, Vermont. You guys in New Hampshire at all or no?
No.
Not yet. All right. You got a teaching background. This is amazing. Elementary education with a concentration in child development. When I read that, I thought, that's perfect for what we do. It comes in handy every single day on the job, Bob.
It absolutely does. We're just older kids, I guess. Yeah.
Similar to Colby, started as a stock boy who was told specifically not to touch any of the computers. He's been with Curtis for 25 years, been in operations, he's been in sales. He's currently the vice president of sales, and confoundingly to everyone, including Rick Schumacher and the team who lives in Minnesota, chooses to be a Vikings fan. So, well, folks, I appreciate you making time for this. And as we were talking about this last week, started our official launch of my new book, The Air Raid Sales Offense. And this goes back 8 years ago. I read this book. It was called The Perfect Pass. And it was by a guy named Sam Gwynn. And it tells the story about changing the game of football and innovation, and how for the better part of 125 years, the game of football has been played largely dominated by the run. And this guy named Hal Mummy came along and said, I want to have some fun. I want to throw the football around. I want to throw the ball more than anyone has before. And I want to score more touchdowns. And this game should be fun. And I know for many folks who played football growing up, fun wasn't a big part of it. Coaches tried to make us run till we puked, and like 4 days, like it was crazy back then. And his whole thing was, I want to be fearless. I want to be optimistic. I want to keep things simple, and I want to have fun. And as I was reading that book, all I could think about was, this is a sales playbook as well. And I think sometimes in sales, we overcomplicate things. And in my mind, selling is helping, and helping is fun. So how do we simplify a lot of this? And ultimately this, the air raid sales offense goes back and forth between the rise of the air raid passing offense and how we can take some of those principles and apply them in our business. And I was a failed college quarterback. The only thing remotely interesting that happened to me, well, I guess two things. I threw one pass in one game. It was almost intercepted, but it was not. And I broke one bone, this little bone right here in the wrist. That was the end of my college career. However, before I left Charleston, Illinois, Eastern Illinois University, I hosted the recruiting visit for one Tony Romo. And 25 years later, with alcohol and therapy and fantasy football, I've gotten over that. So that leads us here. Bob, we're going to jump right in. In part one of the book, I just talk about the first thing we need to do as leaders is to remove confusion. And confusion is the enemy. And how Mummy would say, if the play is too complex and we got all this pre-snap motion and the play call in the huddle is 22 words long, we're going to have problems. We need to eliminate confusion. So that brings us to this idea of kind of a sales strategy statement, and how, as we as leaders, can make sure we're removing any confusion. Maybe give us a little context about what you're working on in Curtis, and how's that changing how you're approaching 2025?
Yeah. So, we sat down with Bradley as a group. We're all thinking that we're all on the same page. We're not confused at all. We're all heading in the same direction. And wouldn't you know, we're not. As leaders, we were all stating different things, and quite surprising, even though we talk about the same thing over and over again, that we were just not on that same page of going in that same direction, our differentiators. So here comes our sales strategy. Sit down, read the book. Seems easy. Yeah, you got your objectives and you're running through. You're like, hey, this is going to be a piece of cake. One thing happened though, as I wrote this sales strategy, I realized that one of my objectives was not correct, and it kind of paused our entire process. So when we talk about confusion is the enemy, I think a lot of my team doesn't like that right now, because I'm really pressing them on confusion is the enemy. And we are going to change our process because of that. So sales statement is just about completed. We are actually working on a couple different things because of that sales statement. So thank you, Bradley. My team doesn't like you right now, and I'm sure they'll be reaching out to you.
I'm fine with that. Sometimes change is hard. And if any of you watching or listening are interested, I cite this Harvard Business Review article that, unlike a lot of Harvard stuff, is actually quite readable. And it's called, Can You State What Your Strategy Is? And the subhead is, a lot of executives cannot simply state their strategy. And if they can't, the people that work for them can't either. And they really just kind of talk about how clearly can we state your objective? How clearly can we state your scope, which is what we are selling and to whom, therefore some trade-offs. What aren't we selling and to whom? And then really focusing on our advantages, how we're better, how we're different. And the challenge there comes when you say you can only, and I think I challenge you guys, Bob, 45 words or less, because it's easy to go barf up 500 words or 1,000 words, and a week later you got it. But that's part of the problem. And how do we distill that down to be really specific about that language? Tina, I saw you writing down some things there. As Bob was talking about strategy and removing confusion, what are you thinking as it relates to MRS?
I started thinking about a lot of top executives that I've talked to over my years in business, CEOs and presidents. And sometimes when they talk about strategies, it's always so simple. And I think to myself, they're all the way at the top of their companies. And what they just said to me was so simple. Why can't I do that? Well, sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. But, that's what I need to do inside of my business. So that's what I was thinking. And then I was also, of course, put my psychology hat on. And I started thinking about making strategy simple. And you really have to sometimes look inward as the leader to what are you doing to maybe complicate things? So is there something that's innate about you that's not allowing you to simplify the process? And that's tricky sometimes.
Yeah, well, I always think about, for me personally and my team, it is infinitely easier to add something else. Oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And it didn't make in the book. My editor said it was an analogy that stretched too far. I still like it. When I was in college, there was a bar on the University of Illinois campus called Cam's. And Cam's was constantly smashed with kids under the age of 21. And inevitably, if you went there, anytime you wanted to go, there's one in, one out philosophy. Some person comes in, that can only happen when somebody comes out. And I was thinking about that kind of packed bar analogy at Cam's with our ideas. It's easy to throw one more thing on top to complicate things. But if you said, all right, we're going to start doing this, and you had a mindset, you had a habit of saying, all right, if we're going to add something, what are we taking away? Because sometimes it's easy for us to do that. You got a whole team following us, and all they're thinking about is, I don't know, that's the 23rd thing that you just added on top of the other 22, right?
Yeah. To get there, you have to carve out time to work on the business. And that in itself is, so I know this, but I really struggle with time management and finding the time to work on those strategies, to dissect my sales process and how I can simplify it. I block out time in my calendar to work on these things. And then I go to the office or my day starts and, stuff starts blowing up. And that's more important, which is why you're coming to MRS shortly to help us work on our sales process, because sometimes you really got to carve out that time to work on the business. And it's hard to do in our industry or in some of the ways that our organizations are set up, because a lot of us are selling managers or selling leaders. We're all involved with the customer, and that always takes priority.
Yeah. Colby, I know you are, whatever title you have on any given day at Cassidy Jones, I always know that you are going to be tight with the customer. Just as you were listening to Bob talk about strategy, I think Tina kind of brought in time management and how we are being really thoughtful where our time goes and our focus goes and to our team. How does this relate to what you're dealing with as we start 2025 at Cassidy Jones in Texas, where it's mandatory to have dead animals hanging from your wall?
Yeah, well, that is mandatory. But yeah, I actually wrote down something that Bob said, which is confusion is the enemy. And I like that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. You get everybody, and if everybody's not pulling the same direction, you have turmoil internally. People aren't sure what's the right thing to be doing, what's the most important thing to be doing. Something that we've kind of done internally in some of our leadership classes is we've had certain phrases that have kind of stuck in our company. And one of them is commander's intent. And if you don't know what that is, it's really something that's used in the military where you might have this very detailed action plan for a battle. It's got step by step, X, then Y, then Z, and so on. But the commander's intent is kind of an umbrella that says, hey, you get in there and all else fails. The objective is take that hill. If you're doing things that are going to lead you to take that hill, then you're going in the right direction. So that's a very simple thing, right? It's not going to tell you all the details to do it. But if you know that what you're doing is driving you to take that hill, then you're moving in the right direction.
And Bob, does that sound right? What you are hoping for? Fast forward 60 days, whatever that is, you get done with the sales strategy statement and say it's 45 words, say it's 50. Is that part of your goal for your entire team as you go out and you have uncertainty with competition and customers and all sorts of things that we're not even thinking about yet? Is that kind of that idea that they'll be able to come back to that strategy and say, all right, this is the commander's intent. When all else fails, if we're doing this, this is it. Is it that, or is that maybe not all of it? Or how would you articulate that to your team?
Yeah, so you're right. I'm hoping that we're all heading down that sales strategy. Just we're all heading in that same direction. And I continue to push to my team is value and differentiator. Chip talked to me about what value you provide and what differentiates you from anyone else. And Bradley, I've been speaking about this for about a year now, and we're still struggling. They're still struggling to say what that is. So I would love for them to, yes, understand where we're going, but really, what value do they provide to the client? Because that's going to be our separator to anybody else.
Yeah. As I transition to Colby talking about the work he's been doing in the sales process, I will just reiterate this. And I think I've seen this challenge with teams in good times and bad over the last 13 years, which has largely been good, which is oftentimes salespeople think the knee-jerk response is, how are we better? How are we different? What feels right and is certainly important is hardworking people, been around for a long time, quality products, on time in full, good people, right? And all of those things are absolutely true. I can tell you as someone who worked for a national builder and bought for 7 markets in the Midwest, and my job was to meet with salespeople, that is what everybody is saying. And it's not wrong, it's just not unique in any way. So it's hard work and it seems easy, which is how are we better or different than the competition? And if we are worth more, are we articulating that well enough through everybody to make sure it's really clear why, yes, we're going to be competitive, but I think for everyone on this call, we as individuals and we as a company are worth paying more for. And we can be really specific in those ways to see if it fits with that customer. Colby, jump in. You've done a lot of work. You've shared it with me, put a lot of thought and energy. You've written a lot, really trying to define exactly what your sales process is, which I think is another one of these things that seems easy. Sure, we have a process. Most companies we've seen in the LBM space have processes, plural, that are kind of based on the individual versus the team. Take this any way you want. Walk us through the work that you've been doing.
Yeah, so I'll say what it really came from is as we grow and we add new OSRs, a lot of the information we give them is anecdotal. It's, all right, well, this is kind of the way I go about that. Or go talk to this guy. He's really good at getting new customers, pick his brain on what he does. So you have all these things that people do that are good or that we've done historically over the years, but it wasn't anything solid that you could put in somebody's hands and say, all right, day one, here's at least going to set you out on the right path. If you're doing these things, it's going to lead you to be successful. So that was kind of the thought behind creating our sales process was we really didn't have one that was just defined. So I wanted to at least get something that's defined. It's probably not perfect, and I don't think it has to be perfect. I think it just needs to kind of tell people, hey, make sure you're putting all these things inside your sales process and then make them your own. That's kind of something I start out with. There's a little kind of, 10 sentences before the sales process starts. And it basically says, everybody's different. Your customers are going to be different. The type of customers you're going after are going to be different. So over time, you're going to make this your own, and that's a good thing. You should make it your own. It shouldn't be just a one size fits all thing, but it just has 7 steps. So it's prospecting, preparation, research and qualification, contact, asking for an opportunity, handling objection and being persistent, closing, and follow up. And then there's details under each one of those, as well as, give some examples for things to do and maybe a few things not to do.
Love that. Tina, have you ever encountered what might be generally described as tribal wisdom where, yeah, that's the thing we do. How do you learn it? Well, you hang out with Bob. Bob's been here for 35 years. You hang out with Bob for a week or two. You just kind of soak it up. Has any of that ever existed at MRS?
Yeah, for sure. And I believe that there is a component of that has value, but I don't think that should be your only training technique. I think that if you have wisdom, I like the term tribal wisdom, because there are a lot of seniored or tenured people in our industry who do have a lot to share with others. And I think that should be a component of information sharing and wisdom sharing within your team, but it should not be your go-to training technique. Oh, welcome to MRS. I'm going to put you on the road with Jimmy for a couple weeks and let me know how it goes. Shouldn't work that way.
Yeah, we're seeing this a lot now of if we're not super clear why things work when the times are good and things are working, it's hard to fix the things when they're not working anymore. And I think as an industry, a lot of folks, friends, clients, anecdotally, from my perspective, a lot of things as they're looking back in years past, they're saying, this isn't working like we thought it should. And then you say, all right, well, let's start. How does the motor work? And a lot of times there's no manual, there's no diagrams, there's no details, but you've got a whole lot of people that have been successful that have all been doing things a little bit differently. And I think it's just one of these eternal things on during the good times, how do we try to stress test? Are we successful now just because the entire market's successful? Or are we doing things unique and different that we can do predictably and reliably in good times and bad? Bob, I'll transition to you here on kind of the sales process. This is something that we just touched on a little bit, but one of the things I think, quite frankly, that I was looking for an answer for that ended up in the book was this idea of a sales stack, which is 4 components. What's your sales process? For each step in the process, what are the activities you're supposed to do? What skills are needed to adequately do that activity in that step in the process? And what tools do we have? So process, activities, skills, and tools, and try to really just focus on the vital few versus the trivial many. So it doesn't turn into a giant laundry list, but more of like a really narrow checklist. So Tina, I want to talk pipeline with you. You kind of started with time management. When we get a call, we'll say we'll have a team that's underperforming or an individual. I said, the triage treatment plan is twofold: time management and pipeline. In the book, I talk about this idea of the Jerry Maguire paradox. It is a little bit different, I think, between dealers and distributors, but we'll often talk to folks and they'll say, on average, how many accounts does your average salesperson have? And it'll be 200, 250, 300. And over the years, they will have collected this laundry list. And I'll say, how does an individual person deliver value to 300, let alone 100, et cetera? And a lot of times it's like, well, back in 1984, they landed the customers, so is theirs, right? Yep. How do you think about managing pipeline, coaching to the pipeline, and keeping that narrow enough where any customer of yours, of MRS, will say, yeah, you call up and Jimmy, here's what Jimmy did for me in the last 30 days, and this is why we love working with you?
So my dream of how to handle pipeline is a little different than what we are actually doing today to handle pipeline. So I'll talk about my dream and how I feel it should be and what we're always working towards. My salespeople have an average of 75 to not quite 100, but just a little under 100 customers. And most of my salespeople categorize them like an A, B, C, and maybe the A customers are about 20%. And that's where they focus most of their time. So I would say it's usually maybe 20 to 25 customers that they're focused on. Now, pipeline development is, again, working on the business. So you have to take time to really write down, and we were talking about sales process, working those customers through the sales process so that you can manage and see what's in your pipeline. And sometimes salespeople, they're always running to wherever the fire is. Oh, I've got to get this guy samples, or I've got to get this customer, I've got to run to this job site. And that takes them away from managing their pipeline. You've got to write it down. You've got to track it through. You've got to work with your immediate supervisor to help with strategies and keep pushing it forward until it dies, or, you cross it over the finish line.
Colby, you're going to share some, I can't even wait. I can't wait for it. Some incredible wisdom. It's going to lead us into the Q&A session because time has been flying.
I'll bring it home.
Thank you. Talk a little about your pipeline, because you've been working, not only have you been working with your team, you won a trophy.
I did, and I wish I had it here. I presented it to the guys on the team that did it best. It's like a Stanley Cup. Just imagine me holding the Stanley Cup, and it's basically that. Yeah, so our team's been working on it now well over a year. It has been a process, getting people used to thinking about their pipeline, getting the information in there. Tina, like you said, they're very busy, and customers take priority, and, trying to get people to kind of slow down. Hey, give us the information. But I think one of the main things, and I've talked to Bradley a lot about this, is, I think it's important, because I've been in sales and had things that people ask for from me when I was in sales. And to me, it was always, all right, I'll take time and give you all this information. But I think the important thing is then, as the company or as leaders, is what do we do with the information after we get it? And to me, until we can show them that we're using that information to then give them back something that's tangible, useful to them, or they see how it, moves the needle in our company as far as, how are we buying products based on the pipeline that we're showing you we have. I think that's an important piece. And then lastly, we've been tracking how accurate the pipeline is, or how accurate their goal setting is. And just trying to say, hey, if we can get to a point where every month, no matter what the goal is of our sales team, there's an 80% chance that we're actually going to sell that amount of product. Well, now you can really start making decisions based on that. We're not there yet, but that's kind of the goal. That's where we want to get to, is that, hey, we're asking for this information, and then we're taking all that information you're giving us, and it's having an impact on decisions that we're making real time in the company.
All right, Mr. Rick Schumacher.
Yes, sir. First, we have one question. This person says, okay, I have a comment and a question. Really enjoyed this webinar. Thanks y'all for sharing your insights. My question is, how do I get my hands on a copy of the Air Raid Sales Offense book?
So our tagline is, you are owed nothing, deliver value first. So we tried to honor that. If you're skeptical about releasing 25 of your hard-earned dollars for the book, or 20 for the audiobook, I understand. So you can go to airraidSalesOffense.com. You can download the first 4 chapters of the book to read that. You can also listen to a sample of the audiobook. And airraidSalesOffense.com. Whoever that question came from, bless your heart. Thank you.
And you mentioned the you're owed nothing, deliver value first. I actually have a Super Bowl ring with that saying on it, which I'm wearing right now, which I got from Bradley Hartman. Yay. That's as close as I'm getting to a Super Bowl ring, by the way. Okay, on simplifying the sales strategy, what do you feel is the best method for presenting and developing this to a team? Obviously, buy-in is good, but should they be involved in the simplification process, or just get the distilled strategy once clarified?
Good question. Bob, you want to take that?
Yeah, so we definitely got our team involved right from the get-go. And we, started out with a team of, let's say, 8 or 12, and then we wound up condensing that to 4, and which then condensed to 2. Because once you get too many people, it's hard to really go in a single direction. So I think getting their feedback, understanding what they're thinking about, reduce that, and then really start to understand what direction you're trying to go into. So, the book really lays it out for you pretty well, throwing you a plug there, Bradley. So I suggest definitely looking at that book, and it really starts to simplify it for you.
Yeah, one thing I'll add on that, Rick, is a way to this will be humbling. This may or may not require alcohol later in the day as you consider the full breadth of what you've learned. However, if you got the whole group together, say it's a 2025 kickoff, handing out a 4x6 note card, you probably already talked about the goals, and ultimately strategy is a how question. How are we going to go about achieving our goals? And you give everyone like 2 or 3 minutes and just say, in your own words, write down what you think our strategy is, and have everybody in the entire team or company write it down. And then you collect those all. And as I said, it can be humbling, but that would give you a good view of everybody just to see how far or close you are from where you want to be. And then, like Bob said, you do want to get a diversity of opinion, but at a certain point, if you have too many people there, this turns into a 6-month or a 12-month situation that ideally we should be able to turn this around and have a good working 45-word statement within 30 days.
All right. When sales reps are following up with a prospect, trying to nurture that prospect, how do you coach them to add some sort of value with those communications and interactions and not just repeat the sales pitch?
Tina, you want to jump on that?
I believe you have to find the customer's pain point, what's not going right for them, and then how can you uniquely help to make that less painful and bring value in a way that none of your other competitors can.
I think it's well said. So I was 4 years in purchasing at Pulte Homes, and I was buying material and labor for 7 markets from Cleveland to Denver. I would say the most common method that people tried to either nurture, develop the relationship, deliver value was, do you have any prints that I can do a takeoff and quote you on? And I would kind of look around. Sure, if that's what you want to do. It's my job to know my takeoffs are right. And I built 1,000 of these homes before I came in here. So we have takeoffs, but if that's what you want to do, sure. And if you just want to throw me pricing, sure. And I know salespeople left that and were like, crushed it, making progress, going to tell the GM, like, here we go, man. This is it. This is how we land Pulte. We're going to sell $1 billion. And they never asked me, to Tina's point, do I have any pain points? To what degree do I love working with my current supplier? Is there an opportunity? Is the timing right? So I think part of that is just having a human conversation about, is there a fit? Here's what we're great at. Here's what we love to do. Do you need any of that? Do you like any of that? Do you buy solely on price? I'm a big believer in asking that question straight up. And if they say, yes, I do. All right. Well, now we got a decision. If they say no, we can hold them accountable later when they say, Colby, I liked your pricing. You're 2% high, which is a standard teaching rule for anyone who ever owns a home building business. But at least you can say, well, hey, you said you weren't buying solely on price, right? So anyway, I could ramble on, Rick. Cut me off here.
Yes, you could. Okay, you're cut off. Okay, I'm in a sales development program and waiting to be placed. Do you have advice for someone who's entering into a new territory, whether that territory is well established versus fairly new? He wants to succeed, or he or she. What should they do?
Colby, you got a few of those. What are your thoughts?
After sending out the sales process to the team, I then went and sat down one-on-one with everybody who is classified as being a new OSR for Cassie Jones, and just kind of walked through it with them, made sure they didn't have any questions. But the biggest point that I drove home to each of them was being persistent, because I feel like that's where a lot of people stall out in the sales process, because it's easy to, you almost have to expect that you're going to get a certain amount of pushback. You get excited, you're going, things are going well. And then, oh, well, you missed it. You were 2% high, or, somebody just kind of starts ghosting you or something like that. And it's easy then to say, all right, well, that guy's off my list. I'm going to this next guy. And so I think it's important to have realistic expectations of, it could take 6 months to a year to 2 years to get a new customer. And that's realistic. So I would just say, have that mindset going into it, and I think you'd be fine.
I'll add one quick thing here. And for any sales rep who's waiting to go out, there's 2 things that you can control. 100% control over is number one, how you introduce yourself in a way that isn't about you and your company's history and how many trucks you got. It's about them. And number two, handling objections. There's not a million objections. I'm happy with my current supplier. I'm too busy. Ain't got time. We used you in 1989. It didn't work out. Like there's like 8 to 10 objections, and getting crystal clear on how you start that conversation and anticipate and overcome those objections. That is 100% in your control. And the time to learn that is not when you are on the job site or in the owner's office.
What do you guys suggest when you have a team, quoting, sales processing, et cetera, behind you to help free up time, but you do not feel comfortable putting too much trust in them? Yeah, that's a tough one.
No one's ever had that issue before. Rick, never heard of it. Bob, what do you think?
That's a tough one to answer. If you don't have a team that's behind you that you trust, Curtis, we believe in team and resources, and that's probably one of our differentiators is what we put into those resources and building the trust in that team. So if you're not trusting them, are they the right team is what I'd be asking. I think to grow as a OSR, the team behind you is extremely important. So how do you build that trust? And I think that's something you need to work on. That's a tough one.
It could just be that the people are new, so they don't trust them yet.
Again, this is easy to say as a consultant from the outside, hard to do internally. If there is a lack of trust, the first thing is to acknowledge that. A lot of times this is kind of little drama, and I'll say, why don't you use Terry on the inside? And they're like, because Terry screws up every 5th order. And I'm like, all right, what would have to be true if Terry only screwed up 1 out of every 20? And what inevitably happens if you have a person who wants to do good and they want to work hard is you got to spend time with them. And I think that's the biggest issue is we don't have enough bandwidth. There's not enough time built in to coach them. But that is, I would say, coming back to time is the biggest constraint. And if the salesperson is doing all their data entry and is doing their takeoffs by hand with technology or without, there's going to be a ceiling that is much lower than you probably want it to be on their ability to help you grow your company.
Hey, Bradley, I believe this one's for you. You said make the introduction about them. Can you give some examples of what that looks like and go deeper into what you mean?
Yeah. In part 2, I kind of break it down, but I think most people, when they hear a buyer say, hey, tell me about yourself, or glad you're here. What's your deal? And you meet somebody at a barbecue. Hey, man, what do you do? We take that as human beings. We think it's literal. And they're like, oh, they're interested in me. They're not interested. They do not care about you. They do not care about how many locations you have. They don't care about where you went to high school. What do they care about? They care about themselves. So if you can introduce yourself in terms of them, and you could say something like, hey, my name's Bradley. I work for Cassidy Jones. We help our customers. We're free project management on the job. We get to know the framer. We get to know the trimmers. Our job is to work for you for free, to make your job easier, to give you time back. And if you pause for just a minute, the builder will often think, I could use more time. They're like, do you ever struggle with that? And they're like, yeah. And they said, well, I wake up every day. I love doing that. That's what our company's based upon. We're always going to be competitive. We're not going to be the cheapest, but I love solving these problems and building stuff. Do you want to meet for a cup of coffee, grab a beer? Give me 10 minutes. I can ask a few questions and see if we're a fit. Right. So right there, if that was kind of a monologue of sorts, maybe it's 20 seconds, but I'm introducing myself and saying who I am in terms of them. And if they're like, I don't need no project management. Everything's running smooth. We've never had any rework. We've never missed a day in the schedule. Things are perfect. You said, you know what? Whatever you've got going, Mr. Builder, is amazing. The last thing I'd want to do is screw that up. I'm going to go find somebody else to talk to. But every day, I think sometimes dealers forget that they've got hundreds, if not thousands of customers. They are solving their problems every single day. And yet when we talk to a prospect, we're like, what are they dealing with? Labor, materials on site, follow through, clean up, like all the same ones. So if you can introduce yourself in terms of solving those problems for them, you're going to have people leaning in saying like, this guy knows my business. And you can do that. You've been on the job for 6 months or 6 years.
Great answer. Super valuable. Thank you all. Bradley, you're a huge asset to the industry. So thank you guys. This was really, really good. And I appreciate your time. And thanks everybody for joining us.
All right then, friend. How did that go? Hopefully you enjoyed my conversation with Mr. Bob Aiken of Curtis Lumber, Miss Tina Breen of MRS, and Colby Chandler of Cassidy Jones. So if you are interested in reading the book and or listening to the book, that's right, we recorded it as an audiobook as well. You can go to airraidsalesoffense.com and you should buy 1,000 copies. So, I can put food on my table at night. So, all right, I think that's all I've got. Thank you, friends. We will close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.